This video also continues dispersion for scale variables. Specifically, this video talks about dispersion around the mean, and you should focus on variance and standard deviation. I will go over other methods of finding dispersion around the mean, but you should focus on these two, and the one you should focus on the most is the standard deviation. On this slide, I'm going to talk about how to calculate sample variance. And sample variance is a little different than population variance. It's pretty much the same until you get to step 5, and there's a slight difference, and I'll let you know what that difference is. But when you're calculating variance, you need to make sure you know if you're dealing with the population or if you're dealing with the variant or the sample. So step 1 is the same, is find the sample mean. Well, it's almost the same. Instead of finding the population mean, you find the sample mean. We're going to use x bar for the sample mean instead of mu for the population mean. Step 2 is find the deviations from the mean. So you're going to take each value, subtract off the sample mean. Step 3, you're going to square every deviation. Again, this is like step 3 in the population variance slide. Step 4 is add up all the square deviations to find the sum of squares. Step 5 is slightly different. You're going to divide the sum of squares by the sample size minus 1. So we use little n for this, the sample size, and then we're going to subtract 1 instead of just having n by itself. And we're going to use s squared for the symbol for sample variance instead of sigma squared, which is for the population variance. On this slide, I'm going to go through an example of how to calculate the sample variance. I'm using the same values as from the population example, but in this case, I'm going to pretend these values are a sample from a larger population instead of just the whole population itself. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through this example because pretty much it's almost the same. So step 1, find the sample mean. And so you're going to take 30, which is the sum of all those values, and divide by 6, which is the sample size. So that's consistent with how you calculate the population variance. It's still going to be 5 for the mean. We're just going to call it the sample mean instead of the population mean now. Then step 2 is find the deviations from the mean. So again, we're just going to subtract the mean off for each of them. Okay, and again, you're not going to add up those deviations because they're just going to add up to 0. So after you subtract the mean off for each of the values, then you're going to go to step 3, which is to square every deviation. So we're going to take negative 2 squared, which is 4, negative 3 squared, which is 9, and so on. And then step 4, again, is to find the sum of squares. And that's going to be 32, which is the sum of all those values in the square column, in the squares column. And then step 5 is a little bit different. We're going to divide the sum of squares by n minus 1, so the sample size minus 1. So we're going to do 32, which we got from the squares column, the sum of that, and then we're going to divide by 5, which is 6 minus 1. And we're going to get 6.2. So the sample variance s squared would be 6.4.